Well, for a deeper look now at Egypt's economy, I'm joined by Sahar Aziz, law professor and the Chancellor's social justice scholar at Rutgers Law School. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, the IMF praised Egypt for its reform plan when it approved the $12 billion support arrangement last year. Just how important are these reforms for Egypt's economic growth?
Well, they're certainly important in order to get the loans, and Egypt does need the IMF loan, regardless of the internal and domestic opposition to it, because it's been living on life support since 2013, primarily through $30 billion of foreign aid and loans from the Gulf. So Egypt is not in a very strong negotiating position when it comes to obtaining any type of external aid. Now, with regard to whether it's actually going to make the economy stronger, the question is, how will the money that is saved through the lifting of subsidies and through the removal or addition of certain taxes like the value-added tax, how will those resources be spent? And as your story mentioned, these mega projects and the infrastructure projects are not translating into higher employment. They're not translating into jobs and work for small and medium-sized Egyptian companies, which comprise over 60% of the economy.
So then which reforms do you think are most painful right now for everyday Egyptians in the short term?
Certainly those who are creating the higher inflation rates. The annual inflation rate as of this past April 2017 was 31%. And there are predictions by optimists that it may go down to around 18% by the end of the year. But inflation is really what is pinching every spectrum of Egyptian society, particularly the middle class and the poor. And so when electricity costs go up by 42%, gas costs go up by 50%, and this is just this past summer, which was the third wave of lifting of subsidies, that then increases all the products that rely on transportation and energy. So it has a huge ripple effect. And at the same time, all Egyptians who obtain their salaries through the Egyptian pound, their salary was split in half. It was cut in half as of November 2016 when the currency was floated and the pound went up to nearly 20 to the dollar.
Now, the government is hoping that in the end this will lead to long-term success and growth for the country. So which measures do you think are the most important for ensuring that?
They need to focus on efforts and projects that will produce more employment and more production. Egypt should, in theory, have the advantage that its goods are now much cheaper than imported goods. And in fact, we have seen a positive development insofar as Egyptian products being sold at a higher rate than imported products. However, a significant number of intermediate goods needed to produce Egyptian-made products with Egyptian labor are imported. And so there has been an effort, and there's been some advice, to create industries that produce those intermediate goods in Egypt so they can benefit from the cheaper costs within the country and cause the local and domestic industries to thrive by selling to Egyptians.
So given the demographics of Egypt, which industries do you think Egypt should really focus on so that they can see some meaningful economic change?
Well, that's in many ways the million-dollar question, because some will argue that Egypt, it has 91 million people, and it has a very significant middle class, although it is currently under threat economically, but it has a large number of university graduates. And in fact, the unemployment problem is most serious among these graduates. So some would argue, could Egypt be a version of India where they could use their human capital and college graduates to be a center for technological development? And in fact, what we've seen is many call centers have moved from places like Greece and other European countries that are more expensive, and they've hired Egyptian English-speaking college graduates for these call centers. So that's one direction. And the other is using labor that is, physical labor and labor that doesn't, vocational labor, to incentivize industries to hire them. And that's really something that's going to have to come down to the government deciding where they want to invest their resources.
Right. Now, we do know that some economists believe that Egypt's economy could be the 15th largest within 30 years. What do you think is driving that optimism, and is it possible?
Well, I must admit I don't share that optimism at the moment because there are many obstacles in the way. So first is Egypt has a very serious problem with corruption and the lack of transparency. And if the country and the government doesn't make it easier to start a new business and operate a business without having to pay bribes that are exorbitant, and where you do not have a fair and equal opportunity to obtain a contract or a business opportunity because you don't know the right people, but your quality of goods and your quality of service is in fact superior, then I'm afraid that you cannot have a strong economy because the best, the brightest, and the most hardworking are not going to rise to the top naturally.
Right.
I think they also need to work on their legal system and ensure that the court system provides adequate remedy for any types of breach of contract or any type of legal disputes so that foreign investors are willing to invest.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, unfortunately. Sahar Aziz, law professor and Chancellor's social justice scholar at Rutgers Law School.